topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
And welcome to Triversity Talk. So happy to be here with everybody. It's Wendy on Wednesday. You must be so sick of hearing me say that, but that's the truth. So Triversity is going to be in Port Jervis this Sunday. We will have a table, and please stop by and see us at their fall festival. And I will actually be there helping to table, handing out literature, giving autographs. Just kidding about that. But if you are in the tri-state area, that's New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, please stop in and visit us and just give a little hello. We are also having a rally in Milford, Pennsylvania on Sunday regarding the way things are at this point in the election. That's about as much as I can say. But if you're a Milford person or anywhere in Pike County, please stop on over to the courthouse on the main street. You'll see all of us. I'll also be at a table there too. This seems to be my weekend for tables, right? So tonight's guest, I found by somebody reaching out to me that represents incredible speakers in the LGBTQ plus community. And when I read this person's bio and what they were doing, I knew I had to have them on the show. I call this show Transition, Finding Self-Acceptance and Personal Growth with Wendy Cole. And Wendy Cole is a transition mentor, and she will explain to us what's involved with that. She guides individuals through significant life changes, focusing on self-acceptance and personal growth, using her own unique perspective and proven strategies to help others to live a life that resonates in them finding their true selves. What could be better? Let's all welcome Wendy Cole.
Hi, Wendy. Thank you so much. And I love your name.
Me too. It's the best name. And, you know, I was named from Wendy from Peter Pan. I always feel like
I get asked that question quite a bit, but I picked my name in the 5th or 6th grade.
You knew you were. Why Wendy?
She was the prettiest girl in my class. She was the most popular. She looked the great. She had great clothes. And if I could ever be a girl, I was going to be Wendy.
Because that was going to be the best girl you could possibly be.
Absolutely.
And it's you know what? It's a great name. So guess what? You chose well. So we're both Wendy's here tonight, and what could be better? Wendy, when I got your information in, first of all, I have to tell you, I find a lot of my own people, or they find me, but you came from someone that represents speakers and people in the business world. Yes. And the company has an LGBTQ roster, and I just want to give a shout out to them. Could you do that, please?
Absolutely. Interview Connections, Jessica Rhodes, the founder. It's a wonderful organization. Wonderful. They have been great.
What I have to say, they are great. They're super professional, just totally together. And when you host podcasts, you really appreciate that. So welcome to the show, and welcome to here. I am just going to jump right in. We talked a little bit before the show, and I told you I'm partial to people that transition later in life. I think it's the toughest time for someone to transition because, you know, we go through our life process, and especially if you transition later in life, you haven't been you for your entire life. That's incredible.
I
And you
wasn't.
a whole world based on not who you were, who you knew you should be, but not who you were.
I was never a man. I knew it from childhood.
Of course.
Told my parents at age 10 and was threatened with being committed to a psychiatric facility to be fixed. Scared the hell out of me. Went into severe repression, depression. That started my entire repression and hiding. The next time I tried to do anything about this was my senior year of college.
Wow.
Another profound life change, graduating from college, going into the world. I didn't want to go as a guy.
Right.
No way I was going to do that.
I want to ask you, what made you decide not to transition when you were in college? I've had more than a few people on the show that have, and the one thing that was very obvious, they were very in their late 20s, very comfortable in their own skin, right? Because they got into their own skin early.
Well, I started coming out to people in my neighborhood. I lived off campus. One of my fraternity brothers, yes, I was in a fraternity.
Wow.
Doing everything I could to try and check the boxes off and fit in.
Right.
My entire life up to that point, I was told, boys experiment. He's too young to diagnose as transsexual, probably transvestite, but that just once he has a career, once he has once he has a wife, once he has a house and a family, he'll forget all about being a girl. I knew that was BS.
Right.
But I had to check off the boxes with my parents.
Well, I want to say, were you rising to the occasion of the expectations of family? That's a very real thing.
And well, also too, when you're born and the doctor declares you're a boy or you're a girl, that's when the socialization starts from the parents. And it just becomes more and more intense with extended family, the school systems. Everyone divides us into boys and girls. And I knew I belonged with them, but I had to go over there.
No, I understand.
One of my fraternity brothers knocked at my apartment door. I was working on a paper that day. I decided, okay, well, I haven't come out to anybody on campus at this point, and I don't really want to. It's an all men's college.
Wow.
That was my immersion theory. So I opened the door. I let him in. I said, now you know my secret. I was all dressed.
Wow.
I spent the day in my apartment, dressed, working on papers. Anyway, he looked at me and said, my God, you look better as a girl.
And that was the only reaction, right? This is a very straight dude, a fraternity bro, as we call them.
Well, not so straight. He goes, well, I'll tell you my secret. I'm gay. We'd known each other for 4 years in hiding.
Right. And in all boys college.
Mm-hmm. Well, my psychiatrist then, and this is the reason that I stopped. My psychiatrist took me as a case study patient to a quarterly meeting in New York State of all the psychiatrists from the Tri-City area. Schenectady, Albany, Troy.
Yeah, I know the area quite well.
So here I am in this conference room in a hospital with all these people. There's about 20 people in there. I'm talking. I get 5 minutes into it or so. And one of the doctors, these are all MDs now, stands up, says, I'll see you all next quarter. I've heard enough today. Looks at me and says, you're a freak. You should move to New York City and turn tricks like the rest of them.
What year was that, Wendy?
1970.
Okay.
Early 1970s.
That year, I totally believe it and get it, because go back to that time. That was the mindset. However,
I would be arrested by police if I were spotted in public, red, and they would throw me in jail, fine me, and publish my name in the paper. That happened everywhere in New York State and even in New York City.
It did happen in New York City. I have a lot of friends from that time. I don't know if you saw the film The Stroll. If you didn't see it, you should see it. And a couple of those girls that are still alive are friends of mine, and they talk about what it was like in the day, and you could be arrested. I just, your story, you telling me this, you were like put on display like somebody in the circus for these doctors to judge you, and just what a horrible thing to say.
Well, it was after that I found out from my psychiatrist that this is a psychological condition with no treatment and no cure, and nothing the medical community is going to do for you. Period.
And that probably in your head was it. What could be done? Nothing could be done.
Well, in those days, we also didn't have the internet. We didn't have all the information out there that we currently have today. I had no idea what was going on underground in places like New York City and San Francisco and all of that. So I just kept going. I just kept well, anyway, I just continued on with my research into it, looking into it, and I decided.
In those days, I mean, I remember hearing where you and I are close in age. I remember hearing from my family about Christine Jorgensen, right?
Oh, yes. My parents were all very worried about me. They were worried about me being gay, being like Christine, or anything like that.
I have to ask, did you go to a Catholic college? Was it an all-boys Catholic college or just all boys?
No, just boys.
Just an all-boys college. Wow.
And so that ended my attempt because, one, I realized I would never be part of society if I continued.
Right.
And that doctor was right. I would have to live underground in Manhattan or San Francisco and not be part of society. And
not that I like this doctor, okay, but I know those days, and that was the truth. I mean, a number of my friends now who are legitimate performers, back in those days, to support themselves, they had to do the stroll. They had to walk the streets because you couldn't, and it's not amazing now getting hired, by the way. I have to put that in.
Well,
but not
in 2015, I started. I had my first therapy appointment with Stephanie, my therapist. And at the end of that, see, Wendy, this is the first time in 45 years I talked with somebody for an hour and 15 minutes during an intake session about how I felt and who I am and what I am. Right. Well, when I got up to say goodbye and I turned to leave, Stephanie looked up at me. She was sitting with my file folder on her lap, looked up at me and said, "What's your name?" I snapped back, "Wendy." I didn't even think.
Perfect.
And this was huge. She looked down, crossed out my male facsimile's name. That's what I call him.
Good name.
And crossed out my male facsimile's name and wrote Wendy on my file. From that day forward, I was Wendy. By my third therapy session, I was going to therapy as Wendy. And I had started working on all the mental aspects that I needed to change in order to transition.
But there's a lot. So I'm just going to jump back a little.
Sure.
We're in 40 some odd years. Okay, how were you getting through your life in the 40 some odd years? I hope I have Simone Krauss watching tonight. She'll be on next week. She just wrote a 459-page book about her 40 some odd years and the exact conversation that we're having from her perspective. So I want to know what you, how you dealt with your life then. Were you like, what kind of work did you do? Is it blue collar, white collar? You don't have
Okay,
you want to talk about?
sure. Um, my parents, after college, I moved back in with my parents. This was a devastating time for me. I was really a mess. I got actually a decent job as a waiter. I wanted to be a waitress, but of course I was a waiter.
Great job. That's all that matters.
And I did that for about 7 months or so, saving up money. And our next door neighbor was an IBM vice president. He knew that I was interested in computers. PCs hadn't been invented yet.
Wow.
So he recommended Control Data Institute in Dallas, Texas, as a tech school to go to. They didn't teach computers in college unless you went to MIT or Stanford, someplace like that. So I decided I'm going to tech school. I'm getting into tech. I'm going to try that. Worst case, I can work like crazy because I realized uh, uh, the person who did all of the soundtrack for Clockwork Orange, Wendy Carlos,
Yep.
she transitioned.
Absolutely know that. I absolutely know that story.
And the difference between her and me, she had means, she had money.
Right.
So that's what I was going to do. Get a job in tech,
So that you
save up money.
in money, tech, we all know, is really high paying. I have to tell you, the amount of trans people I know that are in tech, it just seems it's a club of people, probably for the same reason. It also seems to be non-judgmental. You know what I'm saying?
Well, see, tech was a great place for me to hide out. I could be absorbed
Right.
in the digital world. I could hide in there in my computer monitor for 10, 12 hours a day
Right.
easily. And it was a distraction. People like me need distractions, anything to keep the mind off of what's going on. Because this little voice in your head is always turning every day, telling you what you can't do, what you should be doing, and what's wrong with you.
Right.
That little voice is never that helpful. So I spent 40 years of total in tech. First 20, I worked for a corporation in Massachusetts, Digital Equipment Corporation. I started out as a technician. I went into project management. I managed large corporate projects. And then I did sales support work in Philadelphia. And I was transferred when digital was going out of business in the late 80s, early 90s. I was transferred to Philadelphia to their sales office. And I lived in Bucks County from
Gorgeous.
1989 until 2023.
Wow. Not
And
Abbey, Bucks County, by the way. That's, you really, I have to say, you were making, I know your life wasn't working for you. And I get the thing about the distractions because I have heard this before, but you were doing really the best you can. You were smart enough to know
right.
you needed to make money. And maybe you knew in your heart of hearts that that would eventually be your way out.
And I also came to the realization that this wasn't the time for me, both for society and the big thing for me was the medical community. Absolutely zero medical support. And I'd found out that girls were getting estrogen out of the country.
Oh, yeah.
And I later, in the 20 teens, found out from an endocrinologist that I was working with in Bucks County that when he was in NYU in medical school, he was watching girls die of AIDS from sharing needles injecting estrogen.
Yeah. Known fact. I know. Horrible, right?
Yeah. So I give anyone credit who tried to do it then. I mean, and in fact, in 2021, I talked with a lady who transitioned in 1978 in the South.
I can't imagine what that was.
Well, she agreed to have a Zoom conversation with me. And one of the things that really struck me, she said to me, "I envy you." And I said, "Why? You transitioned in 78. You've lived your entire life like that." She said, "I couldn't tell anybody where I was going. I vanished. I came up in another place as myself. What I realized," she said, "is I swapped one closet for another closet.
Right.
I couldn't tell anybody about my past either."
No. Right. And with the whole thing with passing, if she passed, right, then
Mhm.
she had to keep everything a secret.
And that's one word I dislike
Oh,
intensely.
I do too, but you know where that word came from, right? Passing.
Well, my goal when I transitioned was I was going to blend in as any other woman, and that's what I call it, blending.
Right. And I think the year we're in now is a far better word, and that's a buzzword that really needs to get out there.
Be,
But it's
be,
blending as yourself, whoever you
right.
are. It's not about I hate that word passing too, but back in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s, that was the thing. I had somebody that had become a very close friend and she was gorgeous. And all she ever was, she disappeared, okay, with her husband because they just wanted to pass. That was
Mhm.
the word used. But you're right. It is blending. It's like, but blending into society and just being you.
Just being. That's
Right.
it.
We should,
Now,
and every person should be entitled to that.
yes, I agree totally. And from 2015 January to July, I moved into my apartment and emerged as Wendy. I did this in 6 months.
It's very quick
Uh,
in her
One of
case.
the things that I always hear in the community is transition is difficult and takes a long time.
Not true for everybody.
It does if that's what you believe.
Right.
One of the first things I do with my clients, change their beliefs. That's what I had to do with me. I had
Right.
to work on all my thoughts, my emotions, and change them to be more supportive of who I am. I also had to learn to do that deconstruction of all that male socialization that I went through.
So let's talk about the deconstruction because you're hitting on a lot of points here on your journey. You sometimes a person can go through this but not really be able to articulate it. You're a transition mentor. You can obviously not only articulate it, you can help others on their journey.
Mhm.
So to deconstruct, what kinds of things do you tell people, especially as I started out saying, older transition is much harder. When you're over 60 or over 50 or whatever, and you've been living your life, I always say, two teenage kids and a white picket fence as an example, because I know some of those situations too.
Right.
What the hell do you do? Your life was one way.
Well, I succeeded in that 6-month period of eliminating all of the thoughts that I had that were forcing me to repress this.
Okay.
And I started really working on being hyper aware, so hyper self aware,
Hyper self aware.
and also um, working on self acceptance. You can't do this without accepting yourself for who
Right.
you are. And it has to be real. So those the way our I believe, I'll start with this. I believe that life is all about possibilities
Mhm.
and life is change, constant change.
Absolutely.
So um, it's our thoughts and our emotions that combine to form our beliefs. And our beliefs are what either prevent us from achieving what's possible for us or even masking it from our vision, and we'll never see what's possible for us. I started working on that in January of 2015. By February, I was starting to see a totally different picture and believe that I could actually do this. I would leave the house as Wendy, go to therapy. I had a rule with my wife at the time. I would only leave the house as Wendy on the day I went to therapy, and that was it. So,
okay, why was it on that? So you weren't full time?
I wasn't full time in January through June, only on Thursdays. And those were the days I went out and gave myself life tests on the way to therapy,
Wow.
on the way back from therapy. I would work on, here's what I'm going to do. One of the days was I was going to stop for coffee at a Dunkin' Donuts without a drive-through, because drive-through is cheating.
Oh my God, you're hilarious. That's true. Absolutely. So let's just start with a Dunkin' Donuts, right? That's where America loves coffee. We might as well, right? Let's take a test run on this.
So I spent the week visioning what that would feel like. Not what I think, what it feels like. How would I feel being out, standing in line with all these people, wearing a dress, heels, a winter coat, carrying a purse, like any other woman going to work.
Right.
And I had told my therapist, I'm stopping for coffee. You want anything? She said, no, but I stopped to get coffee for me. So I pull into the parking lot. Now, I've been working on visioning this and working on my thoughts and emotions with this, and I couldn't unlock the car. I couldn't get out of the car. I sat there for 5 minutes. I started the car up. I drove to therapy. I walked into her office. I sat down and I said, Steph, I failed.
I knew you were going to say that, right?
And she immediately snapped back. No, you didn't. You'll do it when you're ready.
Exactly.
I thought about that the entire time during therapy, and I looked at her and I said, I'm going to be ready next week.
Yeah.
I'm doing this.
Right.
And she said, I know you are. So I left. The next week I did it. There was another week where she was going away for a conference or something. So I left like I normally would for therapy. I didn't say I wasn't going to therapy. That morning, I did a practice grocery shop.
No, you know what? These are things no one ever talks about or thinks about. And if you're working with people as a transition mentor, you're bringing up like the everyday stuff that anybody goes through, right? But it's different when you're transitioning, because I've heard this. You're worried about being clocked. That's the word.
Clocked, yes. No. And when it comes to the blending in and all of that, I have a 7-page list of male and female attributes in behaviors and mannerisms. And I've been putting that list together for quite a while. I started with me. Well, everything I'm talking about started with me. And
got it.
That really works. The way you sit, the way you carry yourself, your speaking patterns, your voice inflections, all of that.
Well, there's coaches, and I've had them on. There's people that now work with people on voice modulation. I mean, there are, as you know, coaches for everything. I think what is impressing me so much is there's something in you that made you be your own coach. You were able to come to these realizations and get your brain clear enough, because we all have this static in our brains, and you used it early on in the show, the distractions. And whatever you did, you were able to clear that away and walk into Dunkin' Donuts and walk into a supermarket.
And I went walking through the local town down Main Street window shopping, going into stores. I walked into a Starbucks there, bought coffee and a Danish and sat and looked around, and absolutely no one was looking at me.
Right.
And nobody ever did. And I'm thinking to myself after that day, oh God, I can do this. This is wonderful. I'm finally going to get to be me.
And my question was, and I already know the answer to this, in those situations, what were you feeling inside?
Oh, just total, complete joy, and a
Right.
feeling of freedom was coming on.
Wow.
And that's the other thing. My wife at the time, in March of that year, when I announced that I was starting hormone replacement therapy, I was going to the Mazzoni Clinic in Philadelphia to start hormone replacement therapy there. March 4th, I was marching forth.
Indeed.
So that's when my wife said to me that we didn't discuss it. And I said, well, there is absolutely nothing to discuss. I'm doing this for me. It's something that I have to do. I still don't know where any of this is going to go. I still don't know if I'm even going to like living as a woman full time. I have no clue about any of this, but it's something I need to do. I've
Have to do.
needed to do it since
do it.
childhood.
Right.
And that's when she said, we're getting a divorce. And I agreed. I never even asked why. We did discuss it when it was discussed that we were getting divorced. I asked her why we didn't do it way back when. And she said she didn't have any options herself. And as long as I wasn't going to do anything about it, she was going to stay with me, because I told her about this 4 years into marriage.
You had told her 4 years in. Wow.
4 years in. So at any rate, it was just a very intense feeling of joy.
Yeah, I can imagine, and freedom, and
I also knew it wouldn't work out staying married. I don't discourage people from staying married. It is possible, but it takes a very special woman.
I happen to know one of those women, and yes, I agree with you. It does take a very special woman.
Now, this was only a few years ago. It was like in 2021 or 2. My ex-wife said to me, because during the pandemic, I moved back into the house. We couldn't sell the house in 2015 because the market was so bad.
Yeah.
So we agreed to leave it out of the divorce. And so I moved back in. I set up an apartment for myself in the basement, and I spent the entire pandemic year putting my coaching work online and developing my programs and everything else.
What a brilliant use of that time, because, having a tech background, you didn't have to put together a coaching program. You could work anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't do that. After you found your path, and this is what so impresses me, you decided to share it with other people.
What I found out when I started
to do it too.
When I started living full-time, Wendy, I moved to a little town in Pennsylvania called New Hope in Bucks County on the river across from Lambertville, New Jersey.
Yep. Been to both.
I'm sure you have. And large gay community.
Yep.
I figured, oh, they're going to totally get me. They're going to understand all of this. Wrong.
Oh, Wendy, I could have told you that, because I didn't want to stop you, but when you said large gay community, gay male and lesbian, and in that range, right? You have trans, which isn't sometimes.
And the transgender community is a spectrum of people of all different lifestyles and presentations.
Right. Exactly.
So when I got into town, and Chad and Jason left me flowers at my front door one night. And I went down the following day on a Sunday evening at about 9 o'clock when I saw that they got home and introduced myself. And that's when I found out that there was a running bet in the neighborhood. Is she a cisgender woman or is she a cross-dresser who moved into town?
Right.
And I said, neither. I was born transgender. That's how I frame it.
Right.
I was born transgender. I am now living full-time as a woman. I identify as female. I am legally changing my name, my identity, my gender, and I don't know where, I don't know when, but I'm having surgery because I have to repair my birth defect.
Oh, that's the first time I ever heard anybody say that. I like that, Wendy.
Well, that's what I considered it, even as a child.
Is
I would go
because-
to bed at night as a child,
Oh,
5, 6 years old, praying to wake up in the morning with that gone
that it wouldn't
and
be there.
dresses in my closet.
Right. That it just wouldn't be there. I
So
think what's so important about what you're saying, what people need to know, and I have to all the time explain these things to people, that it's here. It's not the biological appendage or the thing that's hanging off of any of us. It's what is in here. It's
two things are between the ears.
Right.
Gender identity.
Yes.
And sexual orientation.
Right. Right.
I knew what my gender identity was. I had no clue what my sexual orientation truly was because I was in the wrong body.
Okay, so that's an interesting thing. That's the first time I heard, because people always say, well, you were this before, you're still staying with your partner. Does that make you were male looking before, now you transition, you're female, you're still with the woman that you had married as identifying, well, not identifying, but reading male. Does that make you a lesbian? People ask these questions all the time. It's this is what confuses people.
Right, because one of the things is when the doctor says it's a boy or a girl, it's based on sex.
Yes.
The organ between the legs.
It's based on the organ.
It. And that has nothing to do with gender.
Absolutely.
And I just knew I wasn't gay. As a guy, living as my male facsimile, I knew I wasn't gay. And in fact, and this used to freak out my gay friends, because I would say to them, I used to think it was gross being with a guy. I couldn't imagine that as a guy. But so here I am in New Hope. I'm talking with these two guys. I was explaining to them about my life. We were talking quite a bit about it, and they were asked. And I this was the first time I ever said this. I'm an open book. Ask me anything you want to, and absolutely nothing's off limits. And I'll never forget Jason looking at me saying, "You shouldn't have said that in front of Chad." And he asked. Yeah. We had a great conversation from 9 in the evening till 3:30 on a Monday morning.
Wow.
I left there mind blown. There was the Raven in New Hope.
Yeah.
I loved going there from about 3 or 4 in the afternoon till about 6 or 7 in the evening and talking with all the guys. I made up my mind I wasn't going to be ignored. And I wanted them to know that there is a whole spectrum out there in the transgender community. I'm part of it.
Yeah.
But I would start, especially with the married guys.
Yeah.
I would say, you knew at an early age. Yep. You repressed it. Yep. You had a career. Yep. You had a wife. Yep. You had a family. You got a house. You did the whole bit. Yeah. And now you're here. You came out. And that all ended. You got divorced and you moved on. The only difference between you and me, you became a G, I became a T. That's it.
Really, really well put. And on that T, there's a whole lot of variations on that spectrum.
Mhm.
And you talking about that is really everything. I mean, in 2024, we are just at the beginnings of those conversations. I mean, I live in New York City, and everybody knows people here that are trans. But you know what? You still hear the dumb questions.
Oh yeah.
And it,
And
it can be, and it can be from the gay community, it can be from the straight community, but you still hear the dumb questions. And I shouldn't say they're dumb. That's my bad saying that. I guess because I would never ask anyone some of the questions that I've seen them ask people that are trans. It's like, why would you ask somebody that? I always want to say, what has that got to do with a slice of bread? It's got nothing to do with it.
well, I really don't mind people asking me questions. And
Right.
if they phrase it wrong or they phrase it, and I know that somebody else in the community is going to go off on them for phrasing it that way, I correct them. I tell
Right.
them how it is. What I came to realize, the gay community in that area of Pennsylvania was my biggest allies and supporters.
Which is fabulous.
I absolutely loved them. They were wonderful to me. And I can't say enough positive things
But
about
Wendy, I
them.
think a lot's got to do with the fact that you are an open book and you are an incredible educator. You really are. Some people were meant to do that. You're an incredible educator. And I think because of how you are, makes people respond to you that way. I think you could go into any gay community or any community where people were willing to listen,
Hmm.
and you would win them over because you would answer their questions, you would communicate. And when we talk about a lot of the things surrounded by trans, especially in the country, and the amount of anti-trans, when these anti-trans bills are so horrific, I say to myself, why would anyone think about doing that to another human being?
Right.
Why would they deny someone their hormones? What a horrible thing to do.
Well, in 2023, I decided that my mission and legacy in my life is going to be doing everything I can
You're
to
amazing.
humanize being born
So
transgender for the rest of society while I help people.
how did you become you're an empath? How did that happen? Is this just in you?
It didn't used to be. I don't think it was, or maybe it was just innate. And because of my birth situation, I was just repressing everything. But tran- transition has been wonderful for me.
Right.
Um, Mentally, emotionally, and physically. Physically, before I transitioned, I hated myself. I didn't take care of myself. I didn't care what I looked like. I didn't care how I dressed. None of that mattered to me. It really didn't. Um, I was 70 pounds heavier. I had blood work problems. I was type 2 diabetic from
Incredible.
age 38.
Young.
And 3 years into this, my primary care physician, I'd already had surgery the year before. My primary care physician looks at me and he goes, I'm going through your medical records and I don't get it. What happened with you?
Right.
Your blood work is coming back perfect. Your type 2 diabetes is gone and you've lost all this weight. And I said, it starts with being happy.
Right. And again, happy is here.
Exactly.
Everything, all roads lead to here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I got, from my very beginning in 2015, I got very much into law of attraction. Not only just the spiritual side of it, but also the scientific and medical side of it too. I started following Dr. Joe Dispenza and reading his works and getting all kinds of information that I needed in order to try and make sense of, okay, I changed my thoughts and that has an impact on my body.
Right.
Well, it's your thoughts that trigger emotions. Now, those emotions trigger glands throughout your body to secrete chemicals, and it's those chemicals that communicate with your body what your mind is thinking. So if you wake up and 5 minutes later you're filled with anxiety because of the thoughts you're having, that's all those chemicals that are pouring into your body. And we can get addicted to those.
Yes.
And become addicted to being depressed, addicted to having anxiety. For me, as I said before, I've been seeing shrinks from the 90s on. I could tell them anything. I never told them about this. I mean, after all, after being called a freak, I'm not going to tell another doctor.
You shut down. But then what's the purpose of seeing a shrink when
to
you're
get
not
meds for the
you?
depression and the anxiety.
Right.
And I never told them the underlying cause.
Right. So they can't fix that. You know what?
They can just give meds.
Right. But I mean, that's what's so amazing. You figured out how to fix it. And when you talk about the whole mind body connection, which is something that's a whole other show for me because I'm completely into it. I was able to get rid of 5 years of back pain that way. I'm sure you know who John Sarno is.
Yes.
The mind body connect. I was one of his patients and I saw it work firsthand. And the stuff that you're talking about, it comes from exactly the same place. But I have to tell you, if you tell regular people that are going through the anxiety, depression, back pain, any of it, they'll look at you like you have two heads half the time.
Oh, I know.
Continue with what you just called. Oh, I love talking to you, Wendy. What you just called their addiction. It's their addiction.
So, one of the things that I found when I was going through this was I was just starting to feel much better about myself, about who I am. And I found out by 2016, 2017, I had people who had been cross-dressing for years that felt bad about themselves and what they were doing and wanted to go forward. So I just started trying to help them understand, because everybody was kind of, how did you do this so quickly? And what did you do with that? And so I would just start working with them to help them feel better about themselves.
And you are the person that can do this, but what you are, most people aren't. That's why being a mentor and being the kind of teacher that you are is going to help a lot of people. All right. You have the language. You understand what I'm saying? You do. You have the language.
Right.
That's a lot of people just don't have that. You can't teach someone that. You can't send someone to become a psychologist or psychiatrist and expect that they're going to come out and have the language. You have the language. You can use it.
Well, I often say I have a PhD in being transgender.
I totally love that. You won't believe it. We are down to the wire with 1 minute left. I need 4 shows for you. What would you like people to know? How about how to reach you?
Okay. Meet wendycole.com.
Okay.
That's the best way to reach me. My calendar's there, my newsletter's there, and a link to my main website where my other interviews are, and my main website, which tells all about me.
Right.
So
I can't thank you enough for everything that you've shared. And we barely scratched the surface because there wasn't even time to get into parents of trans kids, very young trans kids, which is a huge growing population.
Mm-hmm.
And, that again, that's a whole other area that's got to do with this spectrum of trans. You're a very generous person with a really big heart. And
thank you.
yeah.
I'm currently working on a book. I
Good.
got the edits back.
Yeah, good.
And it's a book for parents of transgender.
Oh, fabulous.
And I'm planning on getting that into my publisher in probably October.
So that's one of the things I wanted to say to you. I hope you're working on a book, and I should know, of course, you'd be working on.
And I'm working on a second book,
of course,
which is not a transition story. It's everything I learned about life and living, having gone through this.
Well, even for me talking to you, because I'm not transitioning, but I'm a person that's done a lot of digging deep, self-realization, and I'm very skilled at getting rid of what I call those bad thoughts. We all know
Exactly
what they are, right? And I had to really train myself to do that, and because people
and
say
it's daily work. We never stop.
Right. It can't stop. And people say, you're so happy. Why are you so happy? And I do. I walk around like on this, nirvana level. And even when tragic things happen to everybody, even the way I deal with them is different than a lot of other people will, because I can't let it bury me. We're all walking this earth. All right. Each day is as good as we make it. And you are such a larger than life person, Wendy. You can spread this around to not just the trans community, just to people. People really need what you're offering. And I have to tell you that it's really, really great. Well,
one last thing.
Yes, absolutely.
As far, I said genders between the ears, not the legs. The other thing is it should be less about transitioning and more about correcting how you were born.
Right.
So that you can be who you've always been.
It's a correction. It's a correction.
I think that's one of the ways I encourage all my clients to look at this. Right. If you start shifting how you perceive yourself, it's amazing what you can do.
Yeah. And I will say that if you start shifting how you perceive yourself, it's amazing what you can do. Wendy Cole, thank you. You have been such a stellar guest. Hang out after we go off. I want to definitely get a picture. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in tonight. We'll be back next week. Bye-bye.